Good afternoon. Let me inform you that today's proceedings will also be made public through the verbatim reports and the online TV of the Chamber of Deputies. Let me also remind you that remote participation is indeed allowed to colleagues according to the procedures set forth by the Committee on the Rules of Procedure. We already have two colleagues who are linked up with us remotely, and two of them are here in presence. I would like to thank Chair Tremonti for being here. Within the fact-finding mission on the geopolitical dynamics in the Arctic, today we shall hear Paul McCarthy, Senior Research Fellow for European Affairs
presso
at the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom of the Heritage Foundation. Also, on behalf of the members of the committee, let me greet and thank Dr. McCarthy for his willingness to take part in our proceedings. Let me remind you that Heritage Foundation is a U.S. think tank that was founded in 1973, and it is funded through donations from companies, foundations, and private stakeholders. Its mission is to promote free markets, individual freedoms, and protection of homeland. In 2005, the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom was established within the center, within such think tank, and this is a specialized unit in charge of reinforcing bonds between the U.S. and the United Kingdom. I will leave the floor to Dr. McCarthy for him to pronounce his speech. Over to you, Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Distinguished members of the committee, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the rapidly evolving geopolitical dynamics of the Arctic. Your committee's inquiry correctly identifies the Arctic as a region where climate change, strategic competition, and economic opportunity are converging in ways that will shape the future of global security and prosperity. What was once a remote and largely inaccessible frontier is now emerging as a central arena of great power competition. The Arctic is no longer peripheral. It is becoming pivotal. The Arctic's transformation is driven by three reinforcing dynamics: accessibility, resources, and geopolitics. First, climate change is opening the region. Melting sea ice is expanding access to maritime routes, such as the Northern Sea Route and potentially the Transpolar Sea Route. These routes could significantly shorten transit times between Europe and Asia, altering global trade patterns and reducing dependence on traditional choke points such as the Suez Canal. Second, the Arctic is rich in critical natural resources. The region holds an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its undiscovered natural gas, as well as significant deposits of rare earth elements and other critical minerals essential to advancing technologies and the energy transition. Third, and most importantly, the Arctic has become a strategic theater of competition among major powers. The war in Ukraine has intensified this competition, effectively freezing the Arctic Council cooperation with Russia and deepening geopolitical divisions across the region. Let me talk a little bit about Russia. Russia remains the preeminent Arctic power in military terms. According to Heritage Foundation analysis, Russia has invested heavily in Arctic militarization over the past decade, reopening Soviet-era bases, constructing new infrastructure, and deploying advanced capabilities across its northern coastline. This includes air defense systems, radar installations, and dual-use infrastructure that supports both civilian and military operations. Russia's Arctic strategy is anchored in three objectives. One, control of the Northern Sea route, which Moscow increasingly treats as internal waters rather than an international passage. Two, protection and exploitation of energy resources, particularly liquefied natural gas projects in the Yamal Peninsula. Three, strategic deterrence, as the Arctic hosts a significant portion of Russia's nuclear second strike capability. Despite the degradation of Russian conventional forces in Ukraine, its Arctic posture remains robust. Indeed, the Arctic is one of the few theaters where Russia retains relative strategic advantage. Let's talk about China. China's growing role in the Arctic is one of the most significant geopolitical developments of the past decade. In its 2018 Arctic White Paper, China declared itself a, quote, near Arctic state, unquote, and outlined ambitions to develop a polar Silk Road as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Since then, Beijing has pursued investments in Arctic infrastructure, energy projects, scientific research, often with dual-use implications. China's Arctic strategy is not about territorial control, as with Russia, but about access and influence. Access to shipping routes that could reduce reliance on vulnerable maritime choke points, access to critical minerals and energy resources, influence over governance structures and norms in the region. China's partnership with Russia has further deepened these ambitions. Joint projects, including LNG development and potential infrastructure cooperation, underscore a growing alignment between the two powers in the Arctic. For Europe and for Italy, this raises serious concerns. The convergence of Russian military power and Chinese economic influence risks creating a strategic bloc in the high north that challenges Western interests. Let's move to Greenland, because this is a big issue with regard to transatlantic relations. An increasingly important dimension of Arctic geopolitics is the role of Greenland. Greenland occupies a unique strategic position at the intersection of the Arctic and the North Atlantic. Its geography makes it central to missile warning systems, space surveillance, and the monitoring of transatlantic sea lines of communication. For the United States, Greenland plays a critical role in homeland defense, including through facilities such as the Pitufuk Space Base. For NATO allies, it represents a key node in maintaining situational awareness and operational access across the North Atlantic and Arctic regions. Greenland is also economically significant. It possesses substantial deposits of rare earth elements and other critical minerals that are essential to advancing manufacturing, energy technology, and defense systems. These resources have attracted growing international interest, including from external actors seeking to secure long-term access. At the same time, Greenland faces structural vulnerabilities, including limited infrastructure and a small domestic market. These conditions can create openings for external economic influence, underscoring the importance of sustained engagement by transatlantic partners. And here I'm particularly talking about China, but secondarily Russia. In this context, Greenland should be understood not as a peripheral territory, but as a strategic nexus whose future trajectory will have implications for both regional security and global supply chains. The Arctic is undergoing what might be called a re-NATOization. With the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, 7 of the 8 Arctic states are now members of the alliance. This fundamentally alters the strategic landscape, strengthening NATO's position while also increasing the importance of deterrence and defense in the region. NATO has responded by expanding military exercises in the high north, enhancing surveillance and situational awareness, reinforcing transatlantic defense cooperation in Arctic-capable forces. However, as highlighted in the Heritage Foundation's 2026 Index of U.S. military strength, significant capabilities gaps remain. These include limited numbers of icebreakers and Arctic-capable naval vessels, insufficient infrastructure to support sustained operations in extreme conditions, gaps in domain awareness across vast and sparsely monitored areas. While NATO's strategic position has improved, its operational readiness in the Arctic still lags behind Russia's. A recent development of note is NATO's launch of Arctic Sentry in February 2026, so very recent development. Arctic Sentry represents an effort to integrate previously dispersed NATO activities in the high north into a more coherent operational framework. It seeks to bring together air and maritime surveillance, joint exercises, and anti-submarine warfare operations under a unified structure coordinated through NATO command elements. This initiative has several potential benefits. It enhances interoperability among allied forces, improves situational awareness, and provides a more systematic basis for identifying capability gaps. It also reflects a growing recognition within the alliance that the Arctic is a core strategic theater rather than a secondary area of concern. In addition, Arctic Sentry reinforces the importance of key geographic nodes, including Greenland, in NATO's overall defense posture. Allied deployments and surveillance activities linked to the initiative highlight the role of the North Atlantic corridor in connecting Arctic and European security. At the same time, Arctic Sentry should be understood as an initial step rather than a comprehensive solution. While improved coordination is valuable, it does not in itself address underlying capability shortfalls, including limited ice-capable assets and infrastructure constraints. Moreover, the initiative remains in an early phase of development, with its long-term scope and operational impact still evolving. As such, Arctic Sentry has potential to become a meaningful component of NATO's Arctic posture, but its effectiveness will depend on sustained investment and follow-through by member states. The Arctic's economic potential is considerable, but it is also increasingly contested. The development of Arctic shipping routes could shape global trade flows. For Europe, shorter transit times between Asia and northern ports could enhance competitiveness. However, these routes also raise questions regarding governance, environmental protection, and maritime security. Similarly, competition for critical minerals is intensifying. Arctic deposits could play a role in diversifying supply chains and reducing dependence on dominant producers. And here I would mention Greenland in particular. These opportunities are accompanied by risks, including environmental pressures, strategic dependencies, and regulatory fragmentation. The Arctic Council long a cornerstone of regional cooperation, has been effectively paralyzed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we're seeing a governance breakdown. This has reduced opportunities for dialogue, complicated coordination on environmental and scientific issues, and increased the risk of miscalculation. While alternative formats are emerging, the current government landscape is more fragmented and less predictable than in previous decades. Let me talk a little bit as to why the Arctic is important to my point of view. Italy's long-standing engagement in the Arctic through scientific research, economic activity, and diplomatic participation positions itself as a meaningful stakeholder in the region. As reflected in the committee's inquiry, Italy's interests span energy security, and I would emphasize that, first of all, critical minerals, also important, maritime trade, and scientific leadership. The Arctic is therefore not a distant region, even though Italy is not an Arctic power. It's not a distant region, but one increasingly connected to Italy's broader strategic and economic priorities. Allow me to conclude with several policy iterations. First, continued investment in Arctic relevant capabilities, both civilian and military, will be important for maintaining presence and influence. Second, strengthened coordination with NATO allies can help ensure a coherent and effective approach to Arctic security. Third, efforts to diversify and secure supply chains for critical minerals should remain a priority. Fourth, support for rules-based governance and international cooperation remains essential, particularly with the freezing of the Arctic Council, even in a more contested environment like the Arctic. Fifth, careful scrutiny of foreign investments in strategic sectors, and I would include Greenland here, is going to be very important given China's interest. This can help mitigate risks associated with external influence from malign actors. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Arctic is entering a new phase, one characterized by increased strategic competition alongside continued economic and scientific opportunity. The choices made by Italy, Europe, and the transatlantic community will shape whether the region evolves toward stability and cooperation or toward heightened rivalry and fragmentation. Italy's renewed engagement is both timely and important. By aligning its scientific capabilities, economic interests, and strategic partnerships, Italy can contribute meaningfully to a stable and secure Arctic. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Grazie.
Thank you so very much, Mr. McCarthy, for your remarks. They were indeed food for thought for our deliberations. Do you have any questions from the floor or even remotely? Our deputy chair of the committee is also here, MP Orsini. You would maybe like to take the floor? Otherwise, we have MP Chair Giulio Vigna, who is here and is willing to make a question. He's the chair of the EU Policies Committee here at the Chamber of Deputies. Over to you, MP Giulio Vigna. Thank you very much, Chair Formentini. Let me also thank Chair, so as I said, Deputy Chair Formentini and Chair Tremonti, both Deputy Chair and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I am here in my capacity as both the member of the committee and member of the Arctic Committee. I would like to thank Mr. McCarthy for his speech. I would also like to reiterate what MP Formentini said at the beginning of this hearing. Your speech was indeed very clear and in-depth examination of the current state. Here in Rome, at the beginning of March, last March, sorry, I got carried away. At the beginning of March, the Arctic Forum was held in Rome. At the parliamentary level, we also organized a kind of a spin-off preliminary event in the run-up to this event, that is to say, the Global Arctic event, the Arctic Circle Forum. MPs from the whole political spectrum indeed chipped in. It was a kind of a deep dive into the Arctic-related issues. But let me backtrack to today's hearing. I have something to say to the committee members and to my interlocutor, to our interlocutor, Mr. McCarthy. Both in the conclusions of the Arctic Forum and in the conclusions of the parliamentary event that I mentioned earlier, this was not directly organized by this committee, or this subcommittee. As I said, in both conclusions, we focused on geopolitical issues. There was a special focus on international events. We talked maybe too much of environmental issues, that is to say, climate change. As a matter of fact, these are pivotal questions around which we should gather and find a common stance. In other words, they are issues that are food for thought for us parliamentarians. However, nevertheless, I am afraid here in Rome and in Europe too, and apart, other than this initiative set up by MP Formentini, that was kick-started by Chair Tremonti, that is to say, this Arctic Committee, other than, as I said, other than this initiative, and as far as Rome is concerned, there's no such a thing as a genuine focus on the Arctic itself, not only in environmental terms. In other words, we should shift, we should, of course, enlarge our focus. Geopolitical issues are of the essence, and this is clear, starting from the Northern Sea route. They are unquestionably key. However, as I said, and since I have been following the proceedings of the forum and this event as well, let me remind you that MP Bildi also participated in this event, and he's sitting right in front of me. And to sum up, this is my idea. While when it comes to the U.S. administration, the U.S. administration clearly demonstrated, as in the case of Greenland, that as far as the U.S. are concerned, they have a genuine interest in these issues. When it comes to Europe, the old continent, there is no such a thing as this genuine focus on these issues, not as yet. This is a parliamentary hearing, after all, so there's no secrecy involved here, and we should put all figures and facts on the table. In Washington, His Excellency, the Ambassador Agostina Pina, on March the 5th, delivered a speech on the new Arctic route, and it defined this route as being a non-key issue. And MP Billy, who's sitting here in front of me, can confirm that the Arctic issue has not gained the importance it deserves, not as yet. And this is inconceivable. MP Billy mentioned the new Northern Sea route, and His Excellency Agostino Pina kind of watered down the key importance of the Northern Sea route. And then when it was my turn, then I backtracked to the Northern Sea route by underlying how pivotal it was. And on that occasion, I reiterated the fact that many participants in the hearings that we are having in this days, including this very last one, all speakers have indeed underlined the key role of the Arctic route as being a pivotal one. If it is true, as you rightly said, that there are 7 states bordering the Arctic that are also NATO members, it is also true that if we look at the map and if we put the Arctic up the center, which is exactly what we're trying to do at the end of the day, then it turns out a third of this world territory facing the Arctic, as a matter of fact, belongs to the Russian Federation. So we are a Mediterranean country in the heart of Europe, and Brussels coined the term Eastern flank to put a label on the Ukraine-Russian conflict. So on the one hand, we have Mediterranean countries, on the other hand, what is against us. And we, in turn, coined the term Southern flank to kind of put a label on everything that is focused on the Mediterranean-related issues, including the fight against irregular migration transiting through the Mediterranean. On balance, then, I think it is high time we started talking about a northern flank as well. As you rightly said, one of the possible scenarios could be that of finding ourselves in the midst of yet another northern flank. So I would like to have a clear reply to a clear question on my side. This preamble of mine had the goal of introducing the following question. You praised us in your speech today, and you underlined that Italy has started to put the Arctic back to the center of our political stance. But here's my question. In your opinion, and apart from the institutional rhetorics of diplomacy, we as European Union and we as EU member states and we as NATO member states on this side of the Atlantic, the question is, are we falling short of the duties we have to fulfill in this regard? Is it not clear enough that the northern flank could indeed be pivotal in a near future? If this was the case, what else could we do as a European Union if we're not listened to by the European Union? What can we do as Italy to forge closer ties with the United States of America to make sure that the Arctic is given a central role in the political debate. Thank you, Chair Vigna. MP Maullo asked to take the floor, and after him, MP Orsini, Deputy Chair of the committee. I'll try and be short and concise. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Chair, for the outstanding quality of the hearings, and I would also like to thank Chair Tremonti. Today's speech has indeed underlined the strategic importance of the Arctic, but we've also come to terms with the fact that China-Russia strategic cooperation is another piece in this jigsaw. On the one hand, we have the actions brought forward by the U.S., and on the other hand, the actions brought forward by the European Union. Then there's a huge gap. So based on this gap, what do you think we should do in terms of investments to get a level playing field? In other words, can we get to a level playing field in terms of competition with Russia from the point of view of management of these strategic issues? How long will it take us to become genuine interlocutors vis-à-vis Russia? Thank you very much, MP Maullo, and over to Honorable Andrea Orsini, and then we will give the floor back to Mr. McCarthy. Thank you very much, Mr. McCarthy, for your outstanding and in-depth analysis. I have two questions, indeed, and the first one kind of backtracks to what was mentioned by MP Maulli. In your speech, you underlined both the importance and the gaps of the Arctic Sentry operation. And this throws a new light on the renewed focus placed by the NATO on a new strategic area. But it has also underlined its structural limitations. In order for the Arctic Sentry to be implemented, we need time. And secondly, this does not solve the structural lack of means that affects the whole area. Now, if all of this is true, and if it is true that to come up with a political solution, we will need time, there will be a window of opportunity which will span across years for us to come to terms with the problem. And in the meantime, we will be weaker. So what are the risks facing us, if there's a risk at all? Secondly, I have a question concerning recent highlights. That is to say, the dispute over Greenland. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the specificities of this dispute. But let me tell you that, as a matter of fact, there is such a thing as a Greenland issue. This area is vast and is scarcely protected and patrolled. Otherwise, but moreover, it would be even worse to give way to an outright conflict between Atlantic allies. Is there any way to solve the Greenland issue without causing frictions and drifts within the NATO, notwithstanding all the divisions that came to the surface in the midst of this dispute? I will give the floor back to Mr. McCarthy for his replies.
Well, thank you very much, members of the committee, for all your excellent questions. These are fundamental questions, and they not only have to do with Italy, but also with NATO allies, with the United States, and transatlantic relations in the future. I'll start at the end, the last part of the question, because I think it explains a lot about where we are within the NATO alliance, and then move to the other questions. On Greenland, our position at Heritage has always been that we need to work with our NATO allies to come up with a solution to the problem. We did not advocate invasion. I was never convinced that President Trump intended to invade Greenland. He sometimes uses flowery rhetoric to throw both allies and adversaries off balance, and he certainly did that in this case. And with regard to Greenland, I think we are where we need to be. Ongoing negotiations. Meanwhile, Greenland becomes part of the architecture of increased NATO cooperation in the Arctic. In addition, I mentioned NATO Sentry, but also NATO cooperation is ongoing. There have been operational maneuvers that have taken place in Greenland, and this is something that we applaud here at the Heritage Foundation. At the same time, I want to impress on our Italian colleagues, and actually our European colleagues generally, that Greenland is very, very important to the United States, and it is increasingly, I would actually say, has become crucial to hemispheric security. We talk about Latin America in particular, which is the most important, but Greenland is considered by this administration to be part of our hemispheric security priority. And given that, there's going to have to be a give and take across the Atlantic on the Greenland issue with regard to it. I think we're going to get there. Denmark is now in the process of putting its government together and may be a little bit distracted. But I think meanwhile, our diplomats are engaging with one another, but more importantly, our military figures are within the NATO context are working with one another on that. I want to underline that. With regard to Italy's defense posture, if I can call it that, I know you didn't use this term, but it's very important when we're talking about what Italy can do in the Arctic. Italy needs to continue to build its defense capabilities. The target is 3.5%, as laid out by last year's NATO summit. So that's going to be very important. But it's not only that number, it's also actually hard capabilities, not necessarily for the Arctic. Italy should be a good, and is a good, NATO ally, and may be called upon to help in the Arctic theater. Your main theater, of course, is the Mediterranean. You are very focused on North Africa, what's going on in the Middle East and so forth, as you should be. But capabilities and interests and what you can bring to the table and developing those are going to be very, very important. This is going to take time. There was a question about how long it can take. And this is we're looking at a decade at least for Europe. I'm not speaking of Italy specifically, but Europe getting to the point where it can begin talking about taking on its defense capabilities. And even then, there are areas such as nuclear deterrence, despite the pronouncements by our friend President Emmanuel Macron on the NATO deterrence aspect, there is no substitute for U.S. NATO deterrence at this point. Also, intelligence assets view of the battlefield from a number of different points of view, including joint strike capabilities. Only the United States can handle this. We know that, but we want our European allies, including Italy, to get up to that state. We need to compete with both Russia and China. I know there was a question about this can lead to a conflict. Peace through strength, as we often say here. If you look weak, you invite attack by Russia at the end of the day. So a strong defense deters any designs that Russia may have. On the China aspect, it's mainly economic right now, but it may not stay economic. We could see China becoming much more interested in economic investments. We, with our European partners, need to develop strong corporate governance structures, and that was my reference to governance structures with regard to business very quickly. And here, I've been focusing on developing a Greenland corporation modeled on what we have in Alaska, but improving that. This is with the Native American corporations that we have in Alaska. This is going to be very important. And one thing that we're emphasizing here at Heritage is we need to have the strong corporate governance to keep the Chinese out. We want our European allies in. We want strong U.S. Investment into Greenland. And this is going to be very important. So I'll end there. I hope I didn't miss anybody's questions, but I tried to unify everything as best I could.
Thank you so very much indeed, Mr. McCarthy. As all my colleagues reiterated, your speech was indeed outstanding, and it will be of the essence for our fact-finding mission. Thank you, and the hearing is hereby closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and everyone have a blessed Easter. Thank you very much.